Greetings adventurers and welcome back to Adventure Game Show Geek. Today, I'm going to do the unspeakable. I'm going to review something that isn't a game show. I know, the horror! But don't worry. Despite not being a game show, Itopia is actually a big leap in the world of adventure game shows as we know them. Here's why. A long time ago, I made a review of a game show called Project Z. It was super good, but one of my biggest gripes was that it was based around a massive conspiracy, but failed to go into the specifics of said conspiracy. I wanted to know more about the glitch and how it happened. And you know what they did? They only went and made this, Itopia, a 6-part Welsh language drama all about the origins of the Z. And yes, we're following the Welsh canon here. We have Alice instead of Alice, and Zane in the HMS Ripley should be far from your mind. And yes, another Welsh show, 2 for 2. No, I still haven't learned Welsh yet. Yes, I'm going in blind. Yes, I can handle it. I've done Project Z, I've done Gwachehibin. I can do Itopia. But I have to admit, understanding what was going on was a lot harder. It's just a game show with mostly gameplay, most of the talking is commenting what's happening on the screen, and I can see what's happening on the screen. A fully fledged drama, which is narrative and dialogue orientated, is a whole new kettle of fish. But I understood it surprisingly well. The talent of the whole production team and actors to be able to convey a story so clearly it can cross language barriers is very impressive. This review is going to be spoiler filled. I won't be able to talk about everything I want to if I have to tiptoe around without revealing things. So it's worth checking out the show right now, you won't regret it. So anyway, the show is split between Alice Hunter, the hero of the original game show, and Lucy Hunter, her teenage sister. They're joined by Max Woodward, a journalist with a healthy cynicism around the Z, Zach Evans, a teenage hacker, streamer, and general computer geek, and Mary Thomas, the daughter of an Itopia scientist whose disappearance is what kicks off the whole story. Let's talk about the characters in more detail. First, Lucy. She's a bit vain, she's a bit bratty, she likes to follow the latest trend. She was told that she wasn't allowed to get a Z, so she goes and does what any normal teenager would do. She gets Zach to book her appointment, and she gets one fitted secretly. Although, in our reality, they tend to sneak off to get piercings, not microcomputers inserted into their ears that could potentially bring around the destruction of the world as we know it. But I digress. She's also resourceful, unafraid to ask for help, selfless and brave. So very brave. She reminds me a lot of my sister. Here's a question. If I'd been in Lucy's position, would I have got a Z? No, I don't think I would have. I'm not one for following trends. I'm very squeamish around my ears, and I'm generally paranoid of everything. Also, I don't do too well with too much going on, so having something like that happen would be my worst nightmare. Moving on to Alice. I was really excited to see Alice again. I really like the character in Project Z. It takes a certain type of person to defy a near-government powerful organisation and to risk their life to save others. She can be a bit overprotective of Lucy, but what kind of older sibling isn't like that? And the power of their relationship is the true heart of the show. Zach is great. I love a hacker character. And Zach also particularly reminds me of my friend group, which makes sense because we're about the same age and he's also a massive geek. His willingness to help Lucy is very sweet, and I love the way Brian Hunter just practically adopts him. They literally meet twice and suddenly they're watching horror movies together. It's delightful. In fact, I love Brian Hunter in general. Dads, especially good dads, are so rare in the world of game shows. They're typically dead, like Simon Lansing and the 5th Baron Dunshelm. Evil, Tech Zero, looking at you. Leaving all the hard work to their daughter, like the King of Alaunus, or so much of a question mark that some magic statue writes about it on their shield. There are 3 dads in Itopia. The first is Zach's, and he's presumably so much of a terrible person, Zach doesn't speak to him, which means all the more reason for Brian Hunter to adopt him. The second is Mary's, Edward Thomas, who, while seeming like a good dad, falls somewhere between dead and evil, as he is experimented on and Zedified. His main role is essentially plot catalyst and a way to put Mary through the emotional ringer. Finally, I'm glad to say that while we get a scare in episode 5, Brian is alive and unaffected and ready to help his daughters save the world. He truly is the dad of all game show dads. Interestingly, there are no mums. The hunter mum is dead, but no others are ever brought up. An observation. That brings us to Max and Mary. I wasn't too keen of either of them at first. With Max, the dislike was irrational, mainly because the cafe scenes with him and Alice were the ones I found hardest to understand, so I projected on that. But I quickly got over it. He's definitely one of those sensationalist tabloid journalists, what with the way he twists Alice's words a bit, and the fact the paper's literally called Grapevine. But all his conspiracies pay off in the end, and he also tries to sacrifice himself for Alice, which is good on his own, but the fact he's quick-thinking enough to survive it is even better. With Mary, firstly, I thought episode 4 of 6 was way too late for her introduction. Even though she was foreshadowed in episode 1 and episode 3 was hinting at her arrival throughout. I also thought she was a little too disconnected from the central plot. Her connection was to Ed, not to the hunters like Max and Zach. She felt a little out of place. But I soon grew to love her. And yikes, the angst they put her through. I mean, she gets to see her dad zombified, she gets to watch her dad be essentially tortured, and then she has to face her dad as he tries to infect her friends. Yikes. And the worst/best part was when she nearly talked him back to his humanity, only to have to leave and essentially lose him forever unless they can cure him. Plot-wise, the whole story was interesting and intriguing. Each episode ended on a cliffhanger without feeling forced. The twist with Megan Crane and Nina was so good. I watched back the scene in episode 2 in which they have their conversation, and it's really different knowing which one's the villain of the two now. And the finale was just an entire roller coaster of emotions. I spent the whole series thinking that all of them would be Zedified at the end, and to know they made it out alive was such a relief. But also kinda disappointing. Like, logistically, it's a kids' show. I think there must be rules about them dying at the end. But also, their deaths, particularly Lucy's death, would have given the narrative a lot of power. It would explain why Alice is travelling alone, and why she puts so much effort into saving children. She couldn't save her own sister, and this is her making up for it. Or maybe that's the angsty teenager in me. But I did also love how they all survived, especially with Lucy's immunity. It was an ending of hope, and right now we all need a bit of hope. Also, using EMPs to fight nanobugs, I love that. It really annoys me in media when they paint nanobugs as unstoppable forces, especially when an EMP has already been introduced in the plot. I'm so glad Itopia didn't fall into that plot hole. And what is it about game shows and evil biotech labs? Look, Itopia even has an AI as well, the smart speaker like Iris. Or, if I'm going to point out the obvious, Siri backwards. And also, what about the way Itopia buys up all the alternative news sources, creating a media monopoly? And notice how after the Z was released, the battery on Alice's phone started dying really quickly. It's a really common form of planned obsolescence, in which a tech company deliberately sabotages the old model of their devices in order to encourage people to buy the latest thing, in this case the Z. It's used by most tech companies, including the big ones, and is one of the biggest causes of e-waste, which is quite harmful to our planet and wastes a lot of resources. Itopia is a metaphor, and it's not subtle. You could substitute any big tech company or company in general in there, and you'd only see the truth staring back at you. This show is essentially Baby's first intro into the worst sides of our society and capitalism, and I have no problem with that. The show also has some excellent visuals. It plays with different lighting and camera angles to great effect. And the graphics used to represent the internet activity of the characters look so awesome. Just look at it. It's so clean and sci-fi and cool looking. It really knocked it out of the park. And it's one of my favourite parts of it. I'm gonna have to bring this up, even if I don't want to. Continuity. The original backstory for Project Z had Alice be captured by Itopia after reporting the glitch, and she breaks out in one of their vans. In Itopia, not only are there a lot more people involved, but Alice isn't captured. Lucy and Zach are. They also break out using Brian Hunter's paramedic ambulance, not a white Itopia communications van. Now, I understand adapting the source material, but that also raises the question, where did Alice get her van from? If it didn't come from the breakout, where did she get it? There are other visual discontinuities like Alice's outfit and hairstyle, but those were minor, and the same base elements were there. A white van is a pretty big thing to miss out. But if you were to ignore my incredible pedanticness, or even if you still included it, you end up with an interesting, intriguing, thought-provoking, visually beautiful show. And one that might very well shape the future of game shows as we know them. A lot of people look down on game shows as an inferior form of television, believing they're all just people doing stupid things for fame and money. And I admit, a lot of them are like that, but lots of adventure game shows, especially children's game shows, have a lot of thought put into their concepts and narrative. We have Mission 2110, with Caleb's story questioning his literal humanity. We have Last Commanders, whose story is about a neglected teenager who has to lead a rebellion against her family for the sake of their entire species. And then there's Raven with the same amount of lore as your common or garden fantasy epic. Game show backstories are so much better than what people think. Itopia isn't the first time they've been told outside the show itself. Mission 2110 and Last Commanders told their backstories in the form of online games, like the Psychon archives and the web missions. Nightmare literally had 4 novellas worth of backstory, as well as some extra stuff like the Floyan Shield. But never has it been as mainstream as an honest-to-goodness drama before. The closest we've come is the Raven spin-offs, but even they were still game shows. And it's so different, and it's so new. Unless you're counting Jedi Temple Challenge with the whole of the Star Wars universe behind it. No, I'm not. It doesn't count. My point is, this is entirely new ground being trodden here. It's revolutionary. And if it all goes well, and it better, the show's fantastic, who knows what the future might hold. And that's all for today. I'll see you next time, and until then, it's only a game, isn't it?